Hello everyone, in this video we are going to learn how to send HTTP requests with your Blazor WebAssembly application, and after that we are going to see how to create services, and then we are going to see how to use dependency injection. Also we are going to focus on the types of dependency injection such as singleton, scoped and transient, and finally we are going to learn about 3 ways to inject dependencies in Blazor WebAssembly, and that is constructor injection and inject keyword and inject attribute. We're going to see when to use these 3 types of injections. To send HTTP requests, we're using a familiar object, and that is HTTP client. Any .NET developer knows about this object. We're using the same thing, but since we are working with a front-end technology, we mainly work with JSON objects, and that is why we're using HTTP client JSON extensions to send HTTP requests that are based on JSON objects. And this is where we ended our last video. We have created this courses application and we have a list of courses. Let me increase the size here. As you can see, we have a list of courses and we saw how component inputs and outputs work. We have created 2 pages. As you can see, when you click on it, you get directed to another page, and all these courses, they are hard-coded objects. In this video, we are going to invoke an actual API to load these courses. And now, let me show you the API that we are going to use. This is a simple API that I've just wrote, and as you can see, when you access courses endpoint, you're getting 3 courses, and when I want to get more details about a course, I can just copy the reference ID and I can pass it here. As you can see, we're getting a list of articles as well. We are going to integrate this API to our sample courses application. As you can see on the right, we have Visual Studio, and in our last video, we have created 2 pages. We have created a list of courses, and when you click on it, there's this course page. If I go into courses page, if I go into the code block here, we have the list of courses, and on initialized event, I have hard-coded the values like this. Now we're going to get rid of this and invoke the actual API. First, I'm going to show you the easiest way to do it. I'm just going to remove the loop, and then I'm going to add HTTP client. I'm going to create a new HTTP client object, and then I'm going to assign the result of the HTTP GET request to the courses list. Let me do that now. As you can see, we are familiar with GET async, but some of us are not familiar with GET from JSON async method that we have here. And these methods are coming from this extensions class. And here we can add the URL for getting our courses. Now, if I go back, here we have the list of courses. I will copy the URL here and then let's paste it here. As you can see here, this is an async function. We can't invoke asynchronous functions in uninitialized method. We should use uninitialized async method for that. Let me override that as well. As you can see, we have uninitialized async method. I'm going to copy the same code here and then I'm going to paste it here as well. And then I'm going to add async keyword because we are going to add a wait here. Alright. Now let me remove this one as well. As you can see, we have an error here, and this is happening because we haven't specified the generic result type here. Let me specify that now. This is a list of courses. Alright, run this again. As you can see on the left, we are loading the courses from an actual API. As you can see, we can send HTTP requests with only 2 lines like this. Since this is a HTTP request, even though it loads immediately now, this can take a few seconds to load sometimes, and because of that, I'm going to introduce a loader as well. To introduce a loader, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder in www root folder. I'm going to call it images, and then I'm going to add this loading animation.gif, and then I'm going to create a new folder here. Let me call it common. Inside of this folder, I'm going to create a new eraser component. I'm going to call it loader like this. Alright, we have the component. I want to control the visibility of this loader, and because of that I'm going to add this isVisible parameter here so that I can pass this value from the parent component. And then I'm going to show the image like this. I have a div tag and an image here. And finally I'm going to add this if condition. With this I can control the visibility of this HTML content here. Now I'm going to save it. I'm going back to the courses component. As you can see, we have the list of courses, and here we are loading the courses. I'm going to add our loader component that we have just created. As you can see, we can reference it like this, and we can set isVisible attribute to true. As you can see, we have a loader on the screen, and I want to display this loader only when courses list is null, like this. And then I'm going to add this if condition here. This HTML content will be shown only if the courses list is available. This initial assignment, I'm going to get rid of that. Let me save it. Alright, now let me run this. As you can see, we are seeing the loader for a really short period of time. Now let me maximize this a little, and I'm going to enable offline. Let's see whether I can see the loader. As you can see, we see that. Alright. Now we saw how to send HTTP requests from a Blazor WebAssembly application. And here we have used this get from JSON async method, but you can use post or put or even delete methods depending on your requirement. I'm going back to get from JSON async method like this. Here, as you can see, we have made a few bad design choices. Number one is we have hard-coded this base URL here, and that is not a good thing. We're going to change it in a minute. And we don't send HTTP requests right inside of our main component. We usually use a separate service for that. And this is where dependency injection comes in. Now let's understand what dependency injection is. This is a pattern that you can use to decouple the modules of your application. And dependency injection is an actual implementation of dependency inversion principle that we find in solid software design principles. Now let's understand this with an example. We have courses API, and on the left we have courses app. Now what we have done is we have sent the HTTP request right from our courses component. This violates single responsibility principle from solid design patterns because we are displaying the courses in courses component, and also we are retrieving the courses from courses API, and that's why we should think about moving the API requests to another class. And for this example, we can use two approaches, and we can write two classes as you can see on the screen: in-memory courses and web API courses. Let's say the backend developers broke the web API. You still have to develop the front end, right? In that case, we can use a service like in-memory courses. But when the backend API is back again, we can use that. So we have two classes like this. Now we have implemented single responsibility. But the courses component should not depend on actual in-memory courses or web API courses implementations. It should depend on an interface. There should be a similar interface exposed by in-memory courses and web API courses, so that courses component, the high-level component, does not need to know about the actual low-level implementation details. And that is why we can implement iCourses provider interface in in-memory courses and web API courses, and we can write our courses component to depend on the interface iCourses provider but not the actual implementations. And you can easily switch between in-memory courses and web API courses, and for development purposes you can still use in-memory courses easily, and when you want to move your application to production you can use web API courses, and that actually invoke courses API. Now we understand the importance of using an interface to reduce the coupling, and with dependency injection we should be able to inject in-memory courses and web API courses to courses component, and courses component is not creating in-memory courses or web API courses. We're injecting those dependencies into courses component. Now we have the theoretical understanding of what dependency injection is. Let's implement this on our Blazor WebAssembly app. Now I'm going to Solution Explorer, and in our project I'm going to add a new folder. I'm going to call it Services like this, and then I'm going to add a new interface. I'm going to call it iCourses Provider like this, and then I can add an actual implementation for it. Let me call it Courses Provider. Alright. Now let me add a sample method here to show you how dependency injection works. I'm going to add a method like this. I'm going to call it getID. Alright. And then I'm going to Courses Provider, and here I'm going to implement iCourses Provider interface. I'm going to implement this. As you can see, we have a method. To show you how dependency injection works, I'm going to create a new property here. It's going to be a private string. Let me call it GUID. Alright, and then I'm going to return it. Now let's say I want to invoke this method from our courses list. For that, I'm going to Pages and Courses. Now there are a few ways for me to access iCourses Provider interface from the courses component. One way is using inject keyword like this. I'm going to inject my courses provider. Let me call it courses provider like this. As you can see, we're getting the message courses provider could not be found, and we can add a using like this so that the error goes away. Now let's see whether I can display the GUID. Let me show that in a h1 tag. I'm going to invoke courses provider.getID like this, and I'm going to save it. As you can see, the application is broken. Let's see what happened there. I'm going into console. If we focus here, there's no registered service of type iCourses Provider. And this is happening because we haven't registered iCourses Provider interface in our Blazor services section. I'm going to program.cs, as you can see, and then I can register the dependency here. Let me add a comment, and I can access builder.services like this, and I can add the dependency here. There are three options for me. One is add scoped, and add transient, and add singleton. First, let's try with add singleton. This is a generic method. We can pass in iCourses Provider like this. Alright, and then the actual courses provider, and let me save it now and run it again. We are seeing the GUID that we have returned from our courses provider. Now if I try to switch between these components, as you can see, we are seeing the same GUID over and over again, but when I refresh it, we're getting different GUIDs. Now let me change this to add transient. Since we are making changes to our program.cs, I'm running it again, and now let's switch between these components, and each time I weave the home component, I'm getting a different GUID. And if you're already familiar with the word singleton, you already probably have understood what happens here. When you register services with add singleton, Blazor framework is using the same object for this application until you reload it. But when you're using transient, each time when you switch between these components, a new instance will be created. Also, there's one other method called scoped, add scoped. This method will behave the same way as singleton in Blazor WebAssembly applications. Alright, I'm going to keep this as add scoped. Now we know how to use dependency injection. But this is not the end goal. The end goal is separating the HTTP request that we have made here from our weaving component. For that, I'm going into courses provider, and then I'm going to remove this, and also I'm getting rid of this showing in our courses component as well. Alright, now I'm going to add a method, and this will return all the courses. I'm going to save it now, and I'm going to courses provider, and here we have the option to implement that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to courses component, and this is this component here. I'm going to move this HTTP request to to courses provider implementation. For that, I'm going to copy this code. Actually, I'm going to cut it and remove it from here. And then I'm going to go into courses provider implementation, and then I'm going to paste it here. We have a few errors. Let me fix that. Since this is a list of courses, we don't have to assign it to a variable. I can just return it. And also, we don't have to create this new HTTP client here. We can get it from the dependency injection. For that, what I can do is I can just create a constructor like this and get the HTTP client using constructor injection. You can use constructor injection to get dependencies into your services. But for the classes that you have a razor representation, you can use either inject keyword or inject attribute, which I will show in few seconds. Now that we have HTTP client injected to courses provider, I don't have to create a new object here. I'm going to remove that. As you can see here, we have hard-coded the base URL of the API, and this is not a good practice. Usually these are configuration settings, and these should be kept in an app settings file. Let me show you how to do that now. I'm going to cut it, and then I'm going into courses app and www.root, and then here I'm going to add a new app settings file, a new item. I'm going to search for app settings file, and then I'm going to create it. All right, I'm going to create this object here to store all our configurations, and then I'm going to add the API URL here, and this is the base URL of our API. All right, that is done. We have removed the configuration from the HTTP client request and added that to an app settings file. Now, if you run the application, it will not work because we haven't added the configuration necessary in dependency injection configuration in program.cs. As you can see here, we are injecting HTTP client and we are setting the base address here. What we can do is we can read the base address from builder.configuration, and then we can assign that base address here into HTTP client. I will have to change this to an URI object. Alright, now let me run it again. As you can see, we are getting this error, and that is because we haven't imported the namespace that contains these JSON extension methods. I'm going to import that now. Alright. We have this one warning here, possible null reference return. I'm going to ignore that for now. Alright, and then I'm going to courses.razor. We have removed the HTTP request from courses.razor file, the main component here, and we have moved that to courses provider. Now what we need to do is we need to create an object of courses provider inside of courses.razor to access get all HTTP method. There are a few ways for you to get a reference to courses provider inside of courses.razor. One of the ways is that using inject attribute. Since I haven't showed that to you, let me show that now. We can use inject attribute, and after that we can provide courses provider like this, and then what we can do is we can invoke courses provider dot get all method to get all the courses. Let me do that now. As you can see, that's done. I'm going to save it. Alright, let me save this now. As you can see, app seems to be broken. Let me go into the console, and here seems like a configuration issue. I'm going into app settings and program.cs. As you can see, I have given the wrong name here. Let me change that. Alright, as you can see, the app works. Now if I click on a course, I'm getting redirected into this page that has a list of articles and a description. Just for the completion of this app, I'm going to do a few changes. Let me do that now. Alright, as you can see, I have made a few changes to course.razor file, and I have also introduced these articles list in course.cs. Now if I maximize the app and go back to the list of courses, and if I click on each of these courses, I can get the actual list of articles. As you can see, you're getting the actual data from the API that I've shown. Now we have two methods in courses provider class for getting the list of courses and for getting more information about a course. In this video, we learned about HTTP requests and dependency injection in Blazor WebAssembly. We learned all that while developing a sample application as well. If you have any questions or comments, let me know down below, and also let me know if you want any specific videos on Blazor. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you learned something new today, and I will see you in the next one.